There has never been a startup that's successful that hasn't proven product market fit.
So please meet Jothy Rosenberg. He is a two-time cancer-surviving amputee and a serial entrepreneur who fought back, survived, and thrived. Jothy built 9 companies and sold them for hundreds of millions of dollars.
What I've seen work really well is to start with a service, knowing that you're going to build a product as a result of the service.
How do you defend the fact that you're not making any money right now?
That's a really good question. Be careful, do the math. Did your stake get a lot more valuable, even though you own a smaller percentage of the company? There's a stumble, something happens, which always does, and then you need to raise money again. If that's a down round, you've got a big problem. Most people don't know that the search mechanism in LinkedIn has way more features and way more powerful than most people think.
We're not affiliated with LinkedIn.
No.
Just for people listening, we're not advertising, LinkedIn. There's no affiliate links. Welcome back to Mastering Tech Growth. I'm your host, Mike. Today, we're talking tech startups. We're going to be going from starting strong and finishing big. Joining us today is Jothy Rosenberg. So Jothy's backstory is nothing of a true inspiration. A 2-time cancer survivor amputee, a book author, a serial entrepreneur with, and I think I might be getting this wrong, but I think it's about 8 startups, Jothy, which you launched, scaled, and exited a couple of them over $100 million. So that's a big achievement. So Jothy has a book which is called Tech Startup Toolkit, which you can see in his background. People listening, you can't, but you can Google it. So the book packs a punch of knowledge, and today we'll try to explore some of that. We're talking about critical role of CEOs, effective fundraising, and how to actually build a winning team culture. Jothy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Good to have you. Before we kick in to our listeners, guys, your reviews, your subscribe means a lot to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in. All that love helps us to bring more content to the tech community we all cherish so much. So, Jothy, when I say mastering tech growth, what comes to mind?
Well, figuring out the most important thing for any startup is to figure out the market that they need to enter, and it's got to be, there's got to be a problem in that market that's really big. So the market has to be big and the problem has to be big for the company to have continuous steady growth and get to the point where it can exit. And so many people a lot of tech startups, I don't want to overstate how many, but a lot of tech startup people think that, okay, if I built this great thing, then they're going to come. They're going to find me. And so I had a startup where the market was so ginormous. I know that's not a real word, but I love that word. It was so ginormous that we didn't actually have to do nearly as much work as I've had to do in every other startup. And why was that? Well, it was because it was 1997 and the market was the web. Now, people may forget that the web actually was launched, if you will, in 1995. Yeah, the technologies had been around for a little bit, but really what happened is that networking came to everyone's desktop, and the browsers started to exist, and then we discovered that we were just putting static marketing content on the web, and then one day it was the Super Bowl. And Victoria's Secret put an ad up, and it said, to see more of these beautiful women in this beautiful lingerie, go to your web browser and click on our site. Well, their site crashed so fast. And that was when we and everyone else discovered that, oh, this web thing is going to be huge but it's not going to work very well if people can't figure out how to put websites up that can scale. And we were right there ready with a scaling product. And I've never seen anything like it. We were doing 2 million in revenue. And this was my first one that we had a sale, and it sold for 106 million. And we'd only taken 4 million total in investment. Most of us aren't, and I never had that happen again. Most of us aren't going to see that. Most of the time, you've got to work pretty hard to figure out what is the problem, what is the market, and how do I make sure that the product that I have is really going to be what people want, that they're going to buy. And that's called product market fit. Okay. And there has never been a startup that's successful that hasn't proven product market fit. Anyway, so that's starting to get at the answer to your question. It's a big it's a big question.
It's a big question. So the follow up on this one is, if you would choose one from all the elements which are important to any tech growth venture, what would you choose? But I feel like you entered that. Would that be a market product fit then?
It's the product market fit. There is a little bit more to say about that because you know it's kind of a short phrase, product market fit. It's like a hyphenated 3 words, but it's saying a lot of stuff in that 3 words. So here's how I sort of walk people into solving this problem. So the first is you've got to have a sense of a big problem that needs to be solved. Okay, let's say it's this scaling of the web. Even though I said that was a pretty easy one, but let's just pretend it's not easy, and you're going to walk yourself into how to solve this problem. Okay, so this ability to scale your website on the web is a big problem, and if you don't solve it, then your website will crash and people will go away and you'll never have any business. So that's a big problem. And so now you could decide, okay, I understand what the problem is. It's big. Now, how am I going to get into that market? You can't boil the ocean. You can't say, I'm going to just solve this problem for everybody. And so what we had to do was say, well, who's got the problem the worst, and we'll pay for it. And what we decided was financial services. People like Fidelity and Schwab, they wanted to actually have people think of their site as a big application. I want to go to Fidelity and I want to look at my 401k, which is I'm using a U.S. term for a retirement account. Okay, it's a retirement account. So you say, okay, you got to have a narrow market. Why? Because you're a startup and you don't have the resources to get to the buyer in every market, because not everybody understands yet that there's this scaling problem. So you need to be efficient. So you've got a vertical market that you're going to go after. You know that the problem exists. And now, how do you get a product that it doesn't have too many features in it that are expensive for you to create, and just solves that problem, but it solves it well enough that a customer will buy it? And we call that minimum viable product. How are you going to figure out what that is? What I always like to do is find a lighthouse customer. That's a customer who's kind of an early adopter who will work with you to make sure that what you're building solves their problem. You're not overbuilding it, but they will pay for it. And now, last step, I'm still making it seem easy, but these are the steps. The next step is that minimum viable product that you have worked out with this Lighthouse customer good enough to sell over and over and over again in that market? And so you have to start working with other customers, not just the Lighthouse customer. And we always like to say, and this is something I learned as a math major, 1 to infinity. You prove something for 1, then you say, okay, good, I got that. Now you prove it for 2, good. It still could be that you've found 2 exceptionals. And then when you get to the 3rd one, you say, I think I got it. And that's called product market fit. And now it's time to go to town. Start selling like crazy. Let me just say one negative thing, though, because you still might not have proven product market fit, because there might be that situation where, okay, there's 3, but there's not 100. And that's happened to me. That's okay. You just iterate a little bit more. You haven't quite gotten enough in the product. Anyway, that's my answer.
I took some notes, so I want to just dig deeper before we continue. I think it was Steve Jobs who actually said, build it, they will come. So we're basically saying that in this modern age, it's just not enough to concentrate on building. You actually have many more steps to be successful. So we're just going to put that phrase back to where it came from. Like, the times are different, right? Like you can't just concentrate on building. And you're absolutely right. The tech founders, they love the technology they build with, especially if they're hands-on tech founders, they love the code they write. And somehow there's an innate belief that if they put a lot of energy and knowledge in that solution from technical perspective, that will somehow make a good product. But ultimately, when people take a product, they don't really see a lot of technology behind it. They just see the problem or the value the product delivers, right? And sometimes the tech you build, it is just irrelevant at the end of the day.
Yeah. But, it's funny that I know Steve Jobs said that. But it's funny that, so he's the guy that brought the Newton to market, and it was a disaster, right?
Yeah.
And then he came back at it again, and the next thing out was the iPod, right? The music player. Except what they did then, and of course, no one knew that it was possible. We used to have, we used to walk around with a thing that played cassettes, called a Walkman. Sony made it. It was called a Walkman. But the idea of having 1,000 songs in your pocket was something no one imagined. And what Apple had to do was they paid millions of dollars for an amazing advertising campaign on TV and radio everywhere that said 1,000 songs in your pocket, and then you saw them put a little thing in the shirt pocket, and he's listening with his little earbuds. So I feel like he might have said that, but then I don't think he acted on that again, because he worked very hard to make sure that everybody knew that this problem had been solved and that you could now have 1,000 songs in your pocket.
I agree with you, Jothy. I mean, it's a very crowded market. So we are a technology podcast. So we talk tech ventures, software, mainly software, right? So it's a solution which will go online. Maybe it's a service, maybe it's a SaaS platform, maybe it's, cloud engineering or whatever, but you're going to be selling online. So there's millions of domains, right? It's a crowded space. So if you have a good product which solves problems, as you believe so, because you build it, you have to make sure people know about it. It's like if you're not going to shout from a rooftop, and that's, marketing campaigns, maybe paid ads or some type of advertisement, people have no idea that you exist, right? So
Right.
you can potentially, grow organically where you go like, I have one client, two clients, they will tell their friends, so I get like 5, 10. But that's a very slow burn type of, organic growth. In my view, you want to buy into some campaigns, get that scale, and really look or understand if you actually have market fit. As you just mentioned, potentially there's no market for whatever you just created.
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of us, and I've done it too, um, do a build it. We're sure they'll come. And there was actually a great movie called Field of Dreams that was about that thing as well. I had a company where we had what we thought was fantastic technology to to monitor the XML coming out in and out of a company. And this was in the early days where it was suddenly becoming common that all of your data, between various parts of your company, that were exchanging this massive amount of XML because it just made it so easy to interface one type of system to another. So we decided, well, look, what if we could monitor that XML and we could figure out what it was, and then we could, there are all kinds of things we could do with that. We could tell the company all kinds of things useful to their business operations. And so we had this product, and then we had this typical kind of situation of, okay, we have a solution, now we're looking for a problem, and
I get
we never found one. That was a disaster.
It's so interesting. I get caught in that pattern thinking myself, where you get spark coming from somewhere, and you instantly solutionize. You go like, this would be so great, and something draws you into actually going and building, and you start buying domains and putting some advertorials, but like, you didn't even check the market. You had no idea about the needs. You just had this idea and you started from upside down, where you should just go ahead and actually do some market research and see if that would stick in any way, shape, or form. And I get a lot of like tech startup founders who get caught by the same thing, where they go like, I think I'm solving my own problem. And many books actually says, go solve your own problem. But I think what they miss is to actually go like, you think you have a problem, you're going to be solving your own problem. How about as a next step, you actually go and interview some people and see if they actually have the same problem? Is there a market for that problem?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You're convinced that if you have this problem, everybody does, and that might not be true.
Exactly.
Might not be true.
So I really liked when you walked, through the steps, Jothy, and you went like, this is MVP. Now you need to find your very first client who would help you build this and actually, pay for this. You coined it as a Lighthouse client. So how would I go about finding this? Is it just as simple as maybe, in my network, angels, my family, my friends, my colleagues? Or do you actually want someone who has no relationships to us? We have no network connectivity, so we go out, do some cold outreach. Like, how do I actually get a good Lighthouse client?
So you've got a group of founders, let's say, 3, 5 founders, and they're all linked into each other. Okay. But they're not just 20-year-olds. So they've got a fair number of LinkedIn connections each. So I've got about, I don't know, a few thousand LinkedIn connections, and let's all remind ourselves that LinkedIn has now reached 1 billion people, and my second level connections is already 1 million. So I have a few thousand, and then just because of the way the math works, there's 1 million level 2. So I don't really need to even go to level 3. Most people don't know that the search mechanism in LinkedIn has way more features and way more powerful than most people think. And so I believe if you're a B2B play, that you can find a Lighthouse customer using LinkedIn. That's all you need. And the mechanisms that LinkedIn has in its search, I've tried to outline, and I think I've done an okay job of outlining how you can use that in the book, and it is amazing. You can search by, you can say, I want to find people with this title at companies in this industry that are in my first and second level connections, and then you pay the money to get LinkedIn Sales Navigator so that you can actually message them with it's a short message, and it's really important that you keep it short. You got to figure out a way to say in a few words what it is you have and why they might be interested. Because think about how you react to messages through LinkedIn. It's got to catch your eye, or you're going to just say no. You're just going to make it go away. But I think with a little bit of practice, I think you can do that. And that is literally how I have found my Lighthouse customers the last couple of startups.
Yep. It's probably the go-to. There's some other B2B lead generation companies who are effectively I believe, just take people from LinkedIn and put it in the separate dedicated services and they sell the list. But ultimately, yes, if you have a sales navigator, the Boolean searches are very effective. You find your customers, you do emails, you try to get to someone, and hopefully you find your way into their inbox, into their opinions, and you land your Lighthouse customer. I personally, when we talked about messages, I don't respond to messages. I get way too many. So I send them away to my calendar, and I go like, if you want to talk with me, here's my hourly rate, because responding to all of them is just physically impossible. Once you reach a certain level, but in mails, which is not a normal inbox, it's a separate. That people are actually paying for these messages. They either have a sales navigator or some recruitment account, or they bought in mails, so that's it's almost like advertisement, right? That someone put a monetary effort to reach you out. I do pay attention to these. So you open that connection, you get your Lighthouse customer. So let's say things are going well, you did that beginning well, and you find yourself after 6 months or so, you find yourself within the business and you are founder. So by default, you're probably the CEO of the business. So how, as a first-time CEO, and let's just say this is our first-time gig, we're doing successful. So as a first-time CEO, what are the most crucial strategies I'm thinking? So I'm making sure that I lead my first startup towards the success.
You got to build at least a minimal team to get really. To get going, and you don't need too much. It could be just the founders. Before you've with the founders group, you've got maybe a little bit of foundational technology that you know how to build. I mean, look, if you have a founding team that came together because they see a huge opportunity, because there's a huge problem that they think they can solve. So at the very beginning, you have probably a sense of what kind of technology your product is going to depend on. You don't know what the features are for sure yet, but you're not starting with a completely blank sheet of paper. Okay, so then you try to find this lighthouse customer. Then what the CEO has to do is say, okay, I'm going to need to raise some money because I'm going to need to pay these people. There's only so long even a dedicated group of founders is going to be able to hang around for, not pulling a salary. So you're going to have to, start paying people. And the founding team is probably not enough to really build out, what you need as you start to figure out, I've got a product and I got to start, marketing and selling. So you need some money. So it's the CEO's thinking about things in sort of this order. I've got to make sure before I raise money and before I have more than just my very strong founders, that I've figured out what we're going to do. Then I need to have a little bit of money and raise and hire some people. We can come back to sort of the fundraising in a minute because it's kind of its own topic. And at this point, even though it seems like, are you sure you have to mention culture this early? Yes, you have to mention culture this early because the culture is how you're going to attract and retain a really good team. And culture is really, it comes from the CEO. Everybody else becomes part of that culture and helps spread that culture, but it comes from the CEO. And it's got to do with values and communication. Those are probably the two most important aspects of culture. So, okay, you're establishing culture right away, and then you're starting to build out the team. Those are the most important things to really think about in the first 3 months. And then the stuff we were talking about before starts to come into play. And we could talk, if you want, we could talk about sort of strategies for fundraising, early on.
Of course, that is a logical next step. So we mentioned you having a founding team, which is always easier. I mean, duos, two founders, one sales and marketing, another technology is a very, very common good duo in tech ventures. Often, though, you have solopreneurs, people who can code the products themselves, like a full stack developers. They know the backends and front ends. They can put something together. That sometimes kicks off as well quite successfully. Of course, if you have the foundation of the founders, which is, you hit the nail on like the sales, the marketing, the technology, maybe go to market experts or not, but then you walk into like 3+ people, which is quite rare to have a group coming together, to solve one problem or build one product, and they sort of have synergies around that. So mostly it's like 2 people, or 1. So if I'm 1 or 2, we're having some success. You mentioned, we don't have salaries, but let's say we're paying something to ourselves. So is the raising money like something we should be keeping in mind like instantly, or is there a way where we can avoid raising money?
Sure, there's a way to avoid raising money, and that is if your long-term. Let me put it this way: so you can definitely start be self-funded if you have a service. So what I've seen work really well is to start with a service, knowing that you're going to build a product as a result of the service. So, for example, we had this situation where we had people. This is in the early days of what we call client server, where we were transitioning from everybody did everything on their desktop, and then people started using databases, and that was a hard transition for the world to make, and we jumped into this and said, oh, well, this is really a distributed computing problem. You got your desktop that can do some stuff, but it can't do everything, and everybody has to share the same data on a database. But we had some simple technology, but mostly it was a service because everybody's stuff was different. And we did an engagement where we charged for our time, basically, with a telecommunications company, and did that. And then we did one with a financial services company, and we started to see things that were common, and that not everything was custom. And so we said, great, let's kind of productize that thing that looks to be common. And then we found some other things that were common. And then we figured out what things were different, and we made that, be a simple, configuration interface. And lo and behold, in a matter of a short time, it was a product. And we went from services, which is 35% margins if you're lucky, to product, which was worst case 80% margins and could get to be 90 plus. And that's a beautiful model if you can do it. My current company is it's a hardware-based cybersecurity. And so we had to build hardware. We needed money to build hardware. That was not a service. And so it depends on what it is that you're building, whether you can fund it organically. I mean, obviously, if one of the founders is extremely rich, great, you're set there. But that's not often the case. It's never been the case for me.
So I really love what you said about services, where you went, if you get 35% margin, if you're lucky, because I do see people thinking about, doing like consultancies and services, sort of like a kickstart. I do believe people underestimate that it's a very small margin. Just get a job, just like have less problems, basically. Just a side note. Okay, so let's say.
Sorry, one other thing to remember though. So like I said, 35% margin is the maximum I've ever seen services get. But another thing to remember is that the multiples on an exit are one if you're a services company.
Yep.
If you're a product company, you can get, well, it depends on the industry and the product, but you can get 5 to 15 time revenues. So that's an important factor as well. You don't want to stay a pure services. I mean, unless that's your business. I mean, obviously, Accenture and all of those gigantic services companies, they've figured out how to make that work, but they don't get more than 35%, and if they're going to get bought, they're going to get bought for 1 time's revenue. So that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, that's a very good shout, Jothy. Very good shout. And I do love raising money and actually exiting in the bull markets. I think that's worth to mention, because we gave like such a big range of valuation multiples, where we went like, if your service is going to get 1, but you could go from like 5 to like 15. I feel like that, of course, is market specific and, the richness of all of that. But if you actually are in the bull market, where liquidity is all around and, banks has money, VCs have money, it's actually a lot easier to find money, and it's a lot easier to get a better multiple for exits. Like in this market where we are right now, where we just have a dried up liquidity, is actually quite difficult, or it is more difficult to raise money than it would have been let's say like 2 years, 3 years back.
Mm-hmm.
A side note. All right. So let's say we're raising money. All right. So we are fairly good now. First time CEOs. We got the startups. We have a couple of founders. We're doing well. We went from our Lighthouse client. We scaled up. Maybe we're in the ranges of few hundred people, some type of retainer. Monthly revenues or whatnot. So we're in a good position. We have good numbers, we have a good roadmap, we have a very clear vision. We have definition of a problem, market size. We think we're gonna, be there in like 3 years. So we have a pitch. So how all of that goes, like, how do we think about the pitch? How we look for money? Like, what's the Jothy's approach?
So, would you say that we're at the seed stage, or even before that?
Let's take it to the foundations. Let's say we are at the very first raise. It's a seed raise. We didn't take money yet from anybody. It's, we are quite organic. Maybe we are a little bit self-funded as well. Maybe we put in some money of our own, but effectively it's a seed money.
Okay. Right. So you can raise a seed. So to me, the barrier between seed and Series A is this back to the same really important concept we've been talking about, which is product market fit. So pre that, you can raise money as a seed with a small foundational team, a clear identification of a big opportunity, and you don't need to yet be getting any revenue. So you can, especially, so if you're in the software only, if you're a software only product, especially if it's SaaS, you can get people excited about it. The VCs are used to this model, and they're going to be kind of easy to work with. So you have to think through the fact that VCs don't do well with cold calls. And definitely don't just send a business plan to a VC. It's like sending a manuscript to a publisher that hasn't heard of you before. They have giant shovels and big bins in the back. They just shovel it straight into the bin if you send a business plan over. So there's two ways to avoid the fact that they won't take a cold call. One is you find somebody that does know the VCs, and maybe they do it as a business, or maybe they just do it as being helpful, and they make warm introductions for you to get to the right VCs. And you're going to want to do some research on what are the VCs that are at this stage. So they're seed stage, so their funds are relatively small. Remember, the size of their fund is going to be the telling thing about which stage they can invest in. The guys that have a $500 million fund, they still only have the same number of hours in a day, and the number of deals they have to look at versus how many they're going to invest in is also going to stay the same. So if they have to put 500 million to work versus 125 million to work, and you got the same number of people and the same hours a day and the same odds of how many they have to look at, you realize that the guys that have a bigger fund have to put more money to work, and so they're stuck. They can't do seed. They have to do Series A or Series B. Now, there's a few exceptions. You've seen people like Andreessen Horowitz create a seed fund specifically so that they can find the really exciting early stuff that they then will help along, and then they want to be the first choice Series A. So keep that in mind. You gotta look for the people that are the right size for you. You got to look for people that like the area that you're in, that you're operating in, and then you're going to want somebody to help you connect to them. And by the way, back to LinkedIn. You can find these investors through LinkedIn, and you can find one of your connections, first or second level only, that is also connected to them, and then you ask them to please make a warm introduction, and they'll of course want to find out all about what you've got and all that. So again, that works really well. I've used that for not only finding my Lighthouse customer, but for finding my investors.
Yeah, we're not affiliated with LinkedIn.
No.
Just for people listening, we're not advertising, LinkedIn. There's no affiliate links, but it's such a huge number one B2B platform on the planet that it's just unwise to not put in any attention to it if you're thinking to be a business at some point in your life, or even, like a professional. It's a very, very good professional network to be part of. So one thing which I took as a note, Jothy, when you were talking about, the seed and the sizes of VCs and the fact of, they have the same amount of time, but they have a much bigger funds, and the ones with much bigger funds, they're not going to be looking at, the seed rounds. Well, who looks at the seed rounds is actually accelerator and incubator programs. And you mentioned, A16s, which they have their own seed bucket. So a lot of banks, they have these small stakes, like 50K stakes, 100,000 stakes. And they run these programs to just sort of have that ability to, have connection with the market and these early ideas, which usually one or two founders, they help them to go to the market, try to validate the idea, do the market fit. So they have, all of these programs where at the end you might be actually getting the seed, but at the same time, it actually teaches you to how to do that very first step properly and correctly.
Yes, I know about a number of those. I have not used one myself. So I'm not really an expert on them in any way, but I do think that they have a lot of value for the right stage. They almost all were earlier stage things than what I needed, so that's partly why I never. There's one in our area called Techstars. I did interact with one in Silicon Valley called, I think it's just called Playground. There's Y Combinator, and so there are a lot of them. I did something different. So this current company, the hardware-based cybersecurity, the initial idea came out of a big research program, a government research program. You may have heard of DARPA. It's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So it's the Pentagon's research arm. And I was running a project there. And when we finished and we had good research results, it wasn't ready for the big bad world. It needed to be incubated, but as I said, it's hardware. So I didn't see any incubators like the ones we just mentioned and dozens of others that was suitable for that type of thing. So what I found instead was a laboratory that wasn't exactly, an incubator, but they were interested in incubating something like this. And so it's here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I spent 2 years there, built my team from me to 9 of us inside of this lab. And when I felt like we'd gotten to a point where we'd proven that the technology worked. Then I felt like, okay, we can spin out, we can stand on our own feet and start doing all the things we've been talking about all morning here with the, and ready to raise money. So I do think that ought to be in people's minds, that there's potentially these various laboratories, which if you're doing something that nowadays people seem to like to call it hard tech, that's a good option. I think what we have is definitely hard tech.
Okay, I never heard of a term hard tech. What type of products are behind that term?
Things that are protected by patents,
Right.
And so hardware is definitely a common feature amongst all the things that are hard tech. There are now seed stage VCs who specialize in investing in hard tech, and the reason is that it's risky, but if it takes off, it's highly differentiated. It's protected because we've worked on getting patents early. There's a set of plaques on the wall back there. We've already got 5 issued patents on this stuff, and we're a seed stage company. And the hard part is not that it's hard to do, I suppose, but it's very hard to copy. It's very hard to do the same thing because it's protected, and it's also it takes a while. It takes, so we were 5 years as a research program, 2 years incubating. So there's 7, and so then it's, you come out and you're out of stealth mode and you already have 4 or 5 patents. You're highly differentiated. That's why they like to invest in it.
Mm-hmm. I get that. I can see that easily. I want to take a step back to, you mentioned on a seed, effectively, if you're raising a seed, you need to be able to prove an opportunity, and you don't necessarily need to have a revenue. So I feel like a lot of tech startups founders get sucked into that they go like, okay, on the weekends or at home or whatever, we build something and we're going to try to raise a seed, and they're not really being successful with that. And they try it again. They think that the pitch is wrong, or, they're not getting exposure to right VCs. So they're looking not at their product or service as a problem, but they're looking at the process of actually getting the seed as a challenge, right? For me, all of these situations go, I go like, look, like if you would actually have an opportunity, I think you would just get seen, right? So I think it's, probably is the product itself, and that's why you're not getting seen, or the fact that you have no revenue. So I've always seen that, if you have literally no revenue coming in, I think it's, if you effectively looking to raise money on the dream, right? It's like what's your take, George? Like, if you have no revenues, like, how do you talk with VCs? Like, how do you defend the fact that you're not making any money right now?
Yeah. So, it's a really good question. And I have just found that if you have a clear understanding of a problem, and you can pretend it's a court of law, that when you're talking to the VCs, and you have to prove it. All right, so do your homework and be able to prove. Let's take a not a super new example, but recent enough, and current that everybody knows about it. Let's take Airbnb. Okay, so and I forget the founder's name, but so he understood that what was going on in the world before he had his idea. It was really haphazard. Anybody that wanted to have a bed and breakfast would maybe, if they knew what they were doing, they created a website. How would they get the word out about it? How would they know that the people that call them up and get a reservation are trustworthy? I mean, there were so many issues with it, and so there were a lot of people that just might have tried to offer their part of their house as a B&B and didn't, and were afraid. And he came along and he said, I got this idea. And so you're just talking to a person who's intelligent, and they're going to look at this idea and say, wow, that he's right. That is a good idea. And then they're going to get excited about it. So you have to be able to tell a story. What a lot of founders have trouble with is getting out of the weeds and turning their pitch into a story. Later on, you can show numbers. Look, I sold this many. I'm going in for my Series A, and I sold, this great thing to these people. They're big name companies. You've heard of them, and I've got testimonials. Yeah, you get then you're gonna convince them on that. But you can also convince an early stage investor whose job it is to listen to these pitches, and they got to be stories. They got to convince him that, or her, that they've got something. The idea is something. I mean, you went over it relatively quickly in your question. You said, well, is it the pitch? Yeah, I am actually saying it is the pitch, and that at this stage, it's all about the pitch.
So effectively, it's possible to have something, but pitch so poorly that it becomes nothing.
Yeah, all the time. Okay. All the time.
I'm opposite on that one, Jothy. I'm like, you can have a shitty pitch, but people who put money professionally, they will be able to sense that idea is good. Like I get that the pitch, gets you from probably, from like 1 to 5, it gives you a range of how successful you're going to be. But I'm like, if your idea, is not good and you're actually not solving anything, there's no problem. You can go from like -1 to 1 with the best pitch you can. Like, let's say your pitch is excellent, but if there's really no, tangible potential business behind that idea, you can be the best pitcher on the planet. You're just not going to get that seat.
I don't think what you're saying is quite fair, because I agree with what you just said. But I think when I say the pitch has to be good, I don't mean that your slides are beautiful and that you're articulate and passionate. I'm saying that the story you're telling that is so compelling. Let me give you an example that's very near and dear to my heart. So, my pitch to the seed investors was, look, there was an attack that scared the heck out of the Pentagon, a cyber attack, because for the first time ever, somebody wrote a couple hundred lines of code. I'm not exaggerating, a couple hundred lines of code, launched it, and it destroyed physical equipment halfway around the planet. So that was the first time ever. It made everybody wake up. Whoever wrote that taught the world how to do that. And now the Pentagon was scared out of their minds. So we were a research program there. We had tremendous results. And by the way, all of these things I just said, we could prove. And we're here now to ask you to invest in us commercializing this, and here's what we will do with your money, and here's what we'll have at the end of 12 months with that money. And if we're successful, we're going to ask for another round of money to go a second year. And at the end of that time, here's what where we'll be. Mr. Investor, will you invest?
I get what you're saying. I still feel like you have like you have body behind that, because it's a big. But I see what you're saying. It's still a dream, right? You don't have an actual hardware. You still don't
a dream.
have. Yeah, it's still a dream. It's just like, look, there's a big problem. We're gonna try to solve that problem for you, and you get that story said.
Well,
okay.
No, more than just try to solve the problem. I'm going to say, here's our research results from the 5-year program. Basically, what I was doing, and this is not fair to generalize for people, but what I was saying was, we had $25 million of non-dilutive financing to spend 5 years carefully researching how to solve this problem. Here's our research results. We proved we could do it, but we haven't done it yet. We proved that we could. And what we want to do now with your money, Mr. Investor, is build something, a prototype, a proof of concept, will solve a commercial, a different attack, a commercial attack. We chose Heartbleed. I don't know if you remember that one. It affected 2/3 of all the servers on the internet. And we solved that one. And that was what enabled us to get the second year of funding. And I think that story, what I just told, is generalizable enough for people listening to say, oh, okay, I see. You have to be very convincing. You have to have evidence. Yes, you're telling a story, and yes, it's a dream. And it has to be understandable to somebody that's not a deep expert and didn't spend 5 years doing the same research you did, And that's the delivery part. That's the communications expertise part. And you can get help for that, by the way. Because this is hard, there are lots of people that offer services to help you craft your pitch.
Do you have to do that yourself? Like, can you just go like, okay, I'm a founder, I'm part of the founding team. Maybe it is only me, but I'm gonna, hire someone who's a professional pitcher to deliver my story much better than I can do.
I would stop just shy of that. I don't believe that in an early stage that anyone except the person who's got the vision and the most passion, they have to deliver the pitch. But they can get help in somebody who says, you're confusing me. You're not telling the story very clearly. Let's try this. That's like a speechwriter for a politician. They're not delivering it, but they're helping you make sure that your message is clear, easy to understand, etc.
Okay, I get you. All right, so we conclude that it's possible to raise the seed on a dream without actually having a revenue. And let's say we have a different picture. Let's say we got the seed, things are going well, we're proving something. So about a year later, maybe 2 years later, we're looking at the Series A. What's the difference between those two? How do you approach, is it different VCs, the process is different, or are they actually, very similar in the sense that, the pitch still needs to be there, the story needs to be there. Do the slides differ? Do we put different type of data in there?
Well, you've got, yes, there's going to be, so to a certain extent, they're very similar. You're going to start with a problem statement, then you're going to, describe that you have a solution. You're going to lay out that you're way better than your competition. Here's the size of the opportunity. We've got proof points. We've got 3 customers. That's different than the seed. You've got some numbers, about that. the VCs are different. We went through a little bit about how they're different, because they're bigger funds. Maybe they're a little bit more experienced investors. Sometimes they're certainly dealing with bigger amounts of money, so they're very professional money managers. But you've also matured to get from seed to A, so you'll be ready to talk to them. But it's definitely a different set of investors that you have to go out and find. Don't forget now that you have your seed investors who know a lot of people and may have and they have a high interest in making sure you pick good Series A investors, and so they'll know some. They'll be introducing you. So in some ways, life gets a lot easier. Yes, the stakes are higher. You have to be on your game, but and this is the time to think, not necessarily do something about it, but think about, should I maybe be bringing a corporate investor in as well? There are pluses and minuses to it, but it can be a very good thing to do, because it shows that there's commercial company that thinks that what you have is so important that they want to actually invest in it. And so I've almost always added in a mix of VCs and corporates, and it's done well for me.
Okay, so how much equity I'm giving away in the seed and in the Series A as a founder?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's tough. It's a tough subject because I started off owning 100% of the company, but at that point the company was pretty worthless because without a team, I couldn't do anything. So I gave away 20% of the company to the seed investor, and then when I did a Series A, I gave away another 20% to the Series A investor, and it continued to get diluted over time. But people do get a little bit hung up about ownership stake and dilution. What really matters is, well, if you sold it today, what might you get? You all the way along, you have a pretty good sense of what the valuation of your company is, and that matters the most. And which is why I always caution people not to get too focused on dilution. If going from seed to Series A, if your valuation went up significantly because you've done well and you get diluted, but be careful, do the math. Did your stake get a lot more valuable, even though you own a smaller percentage of the company? And then that's how to really, I think about it. And you want your valuation to steadily go up each round. You don't want to push your valuation to sort of force investors to think of you as worth twice as much as maybe you should be. Because if they invest in you at a very high valuation, like it's at the very maximum of what they think a company that's done what you've done and achieved your results, if they think that you're at the very top of that range, and then there's a stumble, something happens, which it always does, and then you need to raise money again. If that's a down round, you've got a big problem because you scare your whole team that everybody's stake went down how much people, if it suddenly sold now, they would make less than if you'd sold it earlier, and they would also probably make less than if you'd been careful and modest about the valuation you demanded from investors. Because then if you stumble, they might say, well, we built that in. We built in a cushion for the inevitable problem to occur. And so no problem. Your valuation is going to stay constant as we put in more money, as opposed to, no, we're going to punish you. We're going to have a down round. Just a little side comment to caution people.
I do love that saying where, 100% of nothing is still nothing. And that's like, there's an innate psychological element of feeling that you're losing something if you're giving equity out. But at the end of the day, the equity translates, if you sell it or there's a, exit event, to an actual monetary value. And as long as that value is growing, it doesn't matter how much equity you have within the business. But there is something where people don't, they just don't want to give equity out. But if you keep,
well, let me say one more. So
Yep.
if all you focus on is your original founding shares, that you're getting that is getting diluted. True. But try to keep in mind that at each successive round of each new priced round, in other words, when you bring in a new investor from outside and they set the price, and like I said, you're getting a steady uptick in valuation. Mm-hmm. Well, each of those rounds, they also plus up the option pool. And we always try to keep the option pool at a new round around 20%. So it's 20% of the company. And that's what you're using it's the incentive pool, or they're called incentive stock options, ISOs. And you're using those to incentivize especially new employees coming in, and also people that have vested a lot, and you want to make sure that they stay motivated, so you give them some more. Well, that applies to founders too, to some extent. If you've all been diluted a bit, you can ask the new investor, who isn't going to be hard to convince if the founders are starting to look like their stake is too small. They're not going to be too hard to convince to make sure that the founders get topped off a little bit. And then you just make sure that those are options with automatic full vesting on change of control. All that means is that, yes, you vest over 4 years, but if you do a sale, you're going to vest all your remaining shares, all your remaining options, are going to become shares. And now you have a bigger stake. You have to pay the exercise price for those shares, but that's going to be a lot less than the actual value of the share. So,
yep. That's exit math, investment math. So I want to talk a little bit about the teams and growing and downsizing the businesses. So once we get the money in, naturally, we get investment, we have more cash. So there's some growth plans on the table. So we need to hit some targets. It's very likely that we're going to be adding headcount, more people, they lose the culture potentially if we're not careful about that. Maybe we grew too quickly, we spend all the cash, and maybe there's some challenges economically speaking, maybe the market changed, so now we need to shrink the businesses. How do you go through that volatility as a business for a couple of years in front of you? Like, how you do that well without really causing huge injuries to the business?
So is your question really about doing downsizing carefully and then surviving that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Well, look, the people that join a startup, are not expecting a risk-free situation. And startups have to do layoffs all the time. It's a common thing. The thing that you have to keep in mind when there's a downsize that has to happen is you're going to do a nice job of communicating what's happened. We missed something. We've got to retrench so that we can survive. All the things that you have to say, and you have to talk to each person individually and say, this is what's happening. We're laying you off today. You're getting 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, severance, and that's it. You do that quickly. It's like pull the Band-Aid off really fast. But now the most important thing is how you communicate with the people you didn't lay off. That's what really matters. And what you have to do is explain to them what's changed and what's the strategy going forward and why is the opportunity still great. And we're sorry that some of your friends had to go, but they'll be okay. And maybe you've worked it out so that everybody that stays gets a little top off of their options. That's the kind of thing you have to. And when you're preparing for this downsize, spend 80% of your time focused on 85% of your time focused on the people, the team you're carefully crafting as the go forward team, and what you're going to say to them and how you're going to treat them. And 15% of your time on, okay, these are the people, this is what we're going to offer them, this is how we're going to talk to them, this is when we're doing it. Do not do it on a Friday, and don't do it right before a big holiday weekend. It's just mean.
I don't know why that made me laugh, Jothy, but it is mean if you do it on a weekend for sure. So you'll need to get your pitching skills back with that conversation, isn't it? Because you probably learned some along the way to pitch well. You get all these investments. So when you're going to be explaining why the opportunity is still great, these skills will be quite handy for the people who you didn't lay off. Okay, so just to sum up what we did today. So we spent a lot of time about investment, but we did touch from very beginning, the market fit, the first time founders, the most likely CEO seat, where you look at that. You're getting the teams, you're looking at raising money, maybe it's a seed, maybe Series A. We talked a little bit, about downsizing as well, a few tips over there. So that wraps up our conversation for today. A huge thank you for Jothy for sharing. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, review us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Your attention do help us grow and bring more insightful topics to the show. Before we wrap up, Jothy, how do people get in touch with you? How do they buy your book? How, if they want to dig deep into your background and all of that, how do they get in touch?
Okay, so I have a website called jothyrosenberg.com. It provides information about my podcast, which is called Designing Successful Startups. And it also has the book, not to buy the book, but it talks about the book. The Amazon is one place to buy the book. It's also at Barnes & Noble, and it's orderable at any bookstore. And it's called, and it's here for the people that are looking at the video, Tech Startup Toolkit. And what's in the book is 31 what I call anecdotes. It's what's different about this book from many other books is that I'm not just writing a book to brag. I know that a lot of startup people have done that. I'm also not writing something that's all this didactic stuff about, do this and then this. What I'm doing is telling stories. I love stories, and they're on different topics. So there'll be one about your founding group and how to treat them and how to think about them and who should be a founder and who shouldn't be a founder. And so every one of them is telling real stories from one of my 9 startups. And the thing that I'm not afraid to do is talk about my mistakes. And I've made a lot, and they're in there. So I think it's helpful. Yes, there are some parts that are didactic. For example, I lay out exactly what you should have in a data room when you're raising money, and your investors are going to look at you with a fine-tooth comb. So that's how they can get a hold of me. And on LinkedIn, I'm easy. In fact, you could just type Jothy. It's such an unusual name that it's 5 letters, and you can find me on Google, and you can find me in LinkedIn.
Well, we'll have all the details in the show notes. So whoever is listening or watching, just scroll down a little bit. All the access points to Jothy is in the show notes. Thank you again for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Till the next, stay safe and see you online.